Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whichever the case may be, for all of you listening out there across the crazy planet Earth, welcome to a brand new Vestiges After Dark. And I am your host, Bishop Brian Willett, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains on this February 8th, 2022. This evening, I am very happy to announce that we have with us Dr. Michael Grosso, returning guest to this show. Last time we talked about consciousness and how archetypes and archetypal reality sort of bleed into our conscious awareness and create our world. Tonight we're dealing with a completely different subject matter, UFOs, and 4 primary implications coming from new developments in government disclosure, among other things. Dr. Grosso is with us for the next 2 hours. Don't go away. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode of Vestiges After Dark. As always, I am happy to be here with you this evening for the next 3 hours as we talk about metaphysical, paranormal, esoteric, spiritual topics. But for the first 2 hours, the next 2 hours, we have Dr. Michael Grosso coming to you with all these interesting ideas. See, I follow him on Facebook. I don't really use Facebook myself. And my office tends to manage the account. But every now and then I will log in and check out what's going on with some of the contacts we have. And my public page is connected to Dr. Grosso's public page. And he has a very interesting article up that I saw from last November. And that's what really got my attention and made me want to bring him on tonight. And I asked if he'd be able and willing to do that. And he is. So he's here with us tonight. And I can't wait to bring him on to start talking about 4 facts that could change everything. Before we get started in that topic, I'd like to do questions from the ether. And tonight's a little bit different than what I planned. I was originally going to answer a question that came in on the MacLeod network from a member about dreams. Her son had a question about some reoccurring dream that he was having, and I said I'd answer it tonight. I'm actually going to postpone the answer to that question for good reason. I am bringing on in April, the last show before the mid-season break, I'm going to bring on Amanda Morris to come back to talk about dream interpretation, as well as some of the spiritual and psychological meanings of dreams. Lots of archetypes to talk about, lots of different things that we will discuss, and I'll answer that question on that show because I think it will be a good lead-in to the subject matter for that night. So I'm going to postpone that question and jump right into an old one. I sometimes have to go on social media, and I try to avoid it, except for the MacLeod network and occasionally posting to Instagram. I try to stay off social media. It's too toxic of an environment. But I do go on and check things out from time to time, and I get a lot of questions coming in. I can't answer them all, and there's thousands of them now. It's just impossible to answer every question that comes into me. But I do read most of them, believe it or not, and that's the ones that I pick for questions from the ether. This one, though, wasn't really a question. It was more like a comment, and it was something that I feel I needed to address. And I missed it. I admit I missed this one. This came in June 17th, 2022. So it's a couple years old, but it's kind of relevant, I think, to some of the things that we're dealing with on this show, because I know that there are questions that a lot of my audience has, particularly those that might be traditionalists within the conventional church structure, finding some of the subject matter that we deal with on this show to be questionable. Well, there's a dubious nature to everything esoteric, and the church doesn't always like that, but that's what makes me crave the knowledge all that much more. So this individual left this message on my public page on Facebook. I'll read it, and then I'll make a quick comment, then we'll start tonight's show. He said, "Sir, I felt quite sad to learn that you delve into Eastern Buddhist practices, such as Gato Zen and meditation. These are clearly demonic in nature, so you have been deceived by the very beings you purport to cast out. The whole Catholic Church has areas it has compromised in, giving way to seductive doctrines of demons. You have no need of anything besides the simple teachings of Jesus himself. If they were good enough for him, they are good enough for us. Please repent of all those outside ways you have thought to bring in, and stick to the pure and simple ways of Jesus. I implore you out of the love of God and Christ." I'm sure his intentions are well-meaning. I don't doubt that his intentions are well-meaning. The problem I have with this is that this is exactly the very thing that's driving people away from the church and religion. It drove me away for many years, so I know what I'm talking about because I experienced this. First of all, ignorance is not bliss, okay? It really isn't. It's a false bliss. Anytime you try to lock out a branch of knowledge from your scope of consciousness for no less than religious reasons, you're already missing the point of religion. You're already missing the point of spirituality. These things require an open understanding. Believe me, the conventionalists of Jesus' time are the ones who put him on the crucifix, okay? Because he challenged the way they thought back then, and they didn't like it. So, you know, when you come at me with a criticism like that, you have to remember that you're not John the Baptist, okay? So telling people to repent, this is a 2,000-year-old approach. It worked back then. It doesn't work to contemporary times. We live in a different world today. We live in a globalized world, okay? And that means that we need to be open and to understanding other ways of thinking. That's the basis and foundation upon which I've built my entire ministry. That's not going to change. That's not a Catholic Church thing. That's a Bishop Brian thing. And, you know, it does not detract from my commitment to the church. It does not detract from my faith in God and my belief in the Christian religion. It just means that I recognize that there's more to the Christian religion that's out there that's also true. And that's where I'll leave it. Okay, so don't be sad, okay? And you really don't need to be telling me to repent, okay? Because that just drives people away. It won't drive me away, but you know, somebody more vulnerable might read what you wrote, and they will be like, "See, Christians acting like this again." It's not a good way to be, okay? Listen. Don't talk so much. Listen. That's what I have done all my life, and it's served me well. All right, enough of that. So that's our question from the ether. Not really a question, but you know, something worth commenting on. Okay, so you all know Michael Grosso, Dr. Michael Grosso. He has studied the classics and obtained his PhD in philosophy from Columbia University, taught philosophy and humanities at several colleges and universities around the country, and he runs a blog. He's got consciousnessunbound.blogspot.com. You can check him out there. That's also the name of his Facebook page. I really suggest you follow him because he is such an interesting person. And that's how I found this article, which I'm about to read to you here. Just the first part, and we'll be discussing the 4 implications throughout tonight's show. Joining us for tonight's show is Sister Mary Joan. How are you doing tonight, Sister?
Hey, good evening, everybody. Yeah, Bishop, what you were just saying earlier I just shake my head. It's like, that's exactly how you chase people off.
Oh yeah,
I mentioned in the chat room, that's just spiritual immaturity.
And it's actually spiritual bullying is what it is. It's bullying.
Well, it boils down to that, yeah.
You know, when you try to push this agenda that you have, it might be a conviction that's good for you. Maybe it works for you. Okay. But that's not everyone wants to put everyone in a category and compartmentalize them into a little box. That does not work. Okay. And it certainly was not going to work with me. I've never been one for boxes. I like the gamut. I practice the gamut. I explore the gamut, and I'm comfortable with that. And there is everything that exists. If we want to really, truly believe in Christian theology, we know for a fact as Christians that everything that exists is from God. It can't possibly have spawned any other way. So if you start talking about things like other religions, they'll try to say, oh, well, man created this stuff. No. Man creates the concepts and perhaps breaks them down into certain categories through perception. But the core perennial truths have existed from far beyond the origin of man. And that's the basis upon which all religions are built. And when you really dig down into that perennial truth, you find that they're all really saying the same thing. They just have different ways.
They're all paths to the same source.
Yeah, and some do it
experiences and different interpretations.
Yeah, and some do it better than others. Some, right. I will admit, some do it better than others. But not always work for all people. And yelling, repent, is just going to drive people away. It's a nonsensical way of preaching, and you're trying to, I don't know, what is he trying to do? Be John the Baptist? I mean, come on, you're not John the Baptist. You don't need to be yelling out. You're not the voice in the desert saying repent. No. Anyway, tonight, not even close. Tonight we have got Dr. Michael Grosso with us, and I am so excited because I cannot wait to tell you everything that we have in store for tonight. But let's start off with me just reading the beginning of his article that he had on Facebook. And he titles it 4 Facts That Could Change Everything. And he says, the U.S. government has finally revealed the truth about the presence of an unknown agency in our airspace, so-called unidentified flying objects, UFOs, or UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. They are intelligent and apparently like to play with humans in the sky, dancing rings around our most advanced jet planes. This may well be the most interesting fact uncovered in human history. Like no other, it's pregnant with huge implications. It competes with COVID-19, looming climate catastrophe, and the rise of fascism. The alien presence is not going away. Is there anything else we can say that we know about this alien presence? We know that since the 1940s, it is interested in our nuclear weapons industry. Robert L. Hastings documents in detail this unsettling connection in UFOs and nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapons Sites, 2008. The unidentified intelligence is observing our nuclear weapons sites. It may seem to the aliens that we're in extreme danger. One wonders, are they prepared to intervene in the event of a nuclear crisis? I might even add to that, parenthetically, have they already intervened? Has there already been a risk of this, and they are the reason why we haven't blown ourselves to smithereens yet? We'll talk about that tonight. He continues on in the article, so something unidentified is present with us on Earth, technologically quite beyond us. Second, this unknown intelligence is concerned about our world-destroying atomic arsenal. There's also a third fact of great significance, made especially clear in John Mack's abduction studies. The appearances, the supposed craft and humanoid personnel, change and assume forms suitable to the time, culture, and personality of the witnesses to whom they appear. In short, the entity that is haunting our planet is a shapeshifter par excellence. Its substance seems to be light, which can be turned on or off in a flash, reshape itself. It can materialize into all manner of craft and humanoid, or god, or angel, or demon. There is a fourth fact implied by the shape-shifting nature of the entity. The active presence of extraterrestrial intelligence on Earth allows for new ways of interpreting famous events in the history of religion. two examples come to mind. And this is the part that really interested me and where I said, yeah, I gotta get him on for tonight's show. He goes on and says, in the book of Exodus, we are told about a voice of God that spoke to Moses from a burning bush, instructing him to lead the Israelites from bondage to freedom. The voice and light from a burning bush is a spiritual breakthrough motif found in many forms and creeds and turns up often enough among UAPs. For my second example, fast forward to Fatima, Portugal, 1917, and 70,000 people assembled at Cova da Aria, waiting for a miracle predicted by children who claimed to commune with the Virgin Mary. Well, the 70,000 witnessed the sun in the form of a luminous disk plunge to earth and then shoot back up into the sky in zigzag fashion. The miracle of the sun, it was thought, or it was called the miracle of the sun. But the 70,000 flabbergasted witnesses saw was an unidentified disk of light descending and rise to the typical zigzag UFO pattern. The skeptics and communists, anti-religionists, anti-religionists were blown away, especially when all the reports of healing came in. And if Judaism and Christianity, why not anybody in any spiritual crisis or transition? So I'm going to start with the 4 points here. We're going to start with point 1 here in just a moment. But that's the basis for what we're talking about tonight. I wanted to set the stage with the article because there's so much good content in there and there's so much that we could talk about over the next 2 hours regarding this. But let's go ahead and welcome Dr. Michael Grosso back to Vestiges After Dark. Hello, Doctor. How are you tonight?
I'm fine and rather fascinated listening to my article because I've totally forgotten. No, I didn't totally forget what I wrote, but I write so much that I don't remember what I wrote, what I write from one day to another. Obviously, all this material is somewhere in my mind coherent, but yes, I enjoyed writing that, and I was struck that night by these points that, and you know, I forget what the fourth one was, but to my mind, the science of the paranormal is gradually becoming accepted. What's been happening in our culture during this past couple of years, actually, there have been basic changes. I mean, for example, I think that the legalization of marijuana all over the country is a significant event for consciousness. So there are changes there. The reckoning of the oppression of blacks and indigenous peoples, opening up whole new areas. I've been watching an awful lot of stuff on television lately, on public television, I should say, programs about indigenous America, about the history of blacks. That has been a wonderful education. And coincidentally, I lost my contact with Netflix. And I thought, oh, how will I live? How will I pass my nights? And I've discovered just on the television, almost night after night in the past year or so, I've been undergoing an education. So, yeah, I think that things are opening up right now in ways that are completely unprecedented. But the most drastic fact, one of the 4 facts, is that we have, thanks to our highly evolved capitalistic-driven technology, created conditions, a process in the planet, the overheating of the planet, that it's already out of control. And we have minimally 30 years before, at best, that we can begin to return to something resembling what we would call normal. So we are in the midst of a kind of end time process. And most people are not thinking of this. I don't blame them. I have the luxury of being a scholar and a free spirit, as it were. And I'm like you there. I like your ideas that you were talking about a moment ago about your openness. Openness is the word for me. This is the time to be open, but more than open, it's a time where it's going to dawn on us that we have to act, and we have to act in concert. The whole species has to come together to deal with this climate crisis, on top of which we have, I mean, just today I've been listening very closely to what's going on in the Ukraine. This has been what we're witnessing right now in Europe is an event that's on the verge of unleashing something that is completely, you have to go back to World War II.
Yeah.
They're talking about the risk. So we are in a very strange time. But at the same time, my feeling is, though it's a time of menace and threat, it's also a time for opening up and a time that for potential transformation of human consciousness. Anyway, that's my self-introduction.
No, beautifully said. And I mean, I think it is all seeming to lead to something. And that's why I'm so interested in this topic. We don't typically cover UFOs and aliens very often on the show, maybe one episode a season. But I've been doing a little bit more thinking about it because it does seem to be leading to something. I mean, there used to be a time where any talk about this and mainstream media and the government just shut it down. They wouldn't acknowledge it in any form or fashion. And if they did, it would always be with a chuckle. You know, they would always be doing it in jest. And now it's being taken seriously. So, you know, in your first point, you know, you have 4 points that you state here that these are the 4 facts that could change everything. I'll read the first one that you have here, and that is there is an intelligent and super technical entity in our airspace that cannot be overtaken or controlled. The technology appears super physical, almost as if the core energy were psychokinetic. So that's your first point. And we are now having a government that is acknowledging this. That's never been a time in history where that was true.
Nope.
So yeah, the connection with the parapsychology is that, I mean, what we're seeing in relationship to UFO phenomenology are things like telepathy, levitation is a major effect, and the connection with the mystical experience of these Christian girls and other situations where it looks as if, as I say, if you read the Bible, is full of stories that suggest, again, I don't know, I'm not convinced this is true what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying it's a hypothesis now. We know there's this intelligence out there and it's way ahead of us. It can do things physically that clearly we would call miraculous. I mean, St. Joseph of Cupertino, I wrote 2 books about him, Catholic saint, clearly the most extraordinary levitator in history. And the assumption, of course, is that when he had these ecstatic levitations, it was because of some kind of connection with God. The divine agent, the divine source of psychokinesis. Now, I'm not saying that's true or not true, but you have to begin to bring in a whole other sort of set of possible hypotheses. For one thing, I mean, your story about from the question from the ether, this young man, what age is he living in? I mean, this is 2022. You know, as you pointed out, a world culture. We are aware of all the different religions, all the different histories, the miracles. You know, I wrote a book about miracles, not just miracles of Christian. I have to say that the Catholic Church, because of its legalistic tradition, which inherits from ancient Rome, is pretty cool about insisting on, especially ever since the 17th century, insisting upon eyewitness testimony to support the claims of these so-called miracles.
Right.
So all of that, and now we suddenly make this realization that there's an intelligence out there, a form of some kind of technological capacity to wherever it's coming from and whatever it is, also illustrating and demonstrating these powers that we associate with the miraculous production of God. So this is very challenging, very challenging. And and there will be lots and lots of resistance to making these connections. But I personally think that we have to come to a sense of, I think what it's pointing toward all of this is the growing realization that there is one transcendent, and you two guys mentioned this a moment ago. One God, one Spirit that is reflected, revealed in different ways, sometimes in ways that we don't particularly like, maybe crude, maybe out of tune with what we have learned in our tradition, but even within Christianity. I mean, you're a walking illustration. Here you are, you're a Christian, but completely independent in your way of thinking. I don't go to church anymore, but I still am happy for my Christian upbringing because I think it was all good. No one ever harmed me, damaged me. I was never assaulted by anybody. So I understand that people have, but that doesn't mean that the essential core kernel teaching of this particular religion that I was raised in is false. On the contrary, I think it's an aspect, one way that it has revealed itself, very particularly rich and long-lasting way, with many branches, as it were.
Yes.
But the time, I think, has come, and the crisis is driving us, I think, in this direction, to come together in ways that we have never before as a human species, because so much is at stake. And at the same time, we're learning a great deal.
Well, it sounds like it's a great opportunity for us to maybe move beyond some of these unhealthy paradigms that we've held on to for so long. And I think that's that's the problem, I think, socially with how people are reacting. Because when you're stuck in the dark ages, like that individual who commented on my page a couple of years ago, there's no room for growth anymore. You've reached your limit. And the church, I always used to like to say that, the church is really good for bringing you to about a kindergarten level of spiritual understanding, but it doesn't really graduate you from there. And in fact, it actually kind of condemns you if you go any much further than the kindergarten level of theological understanding. It kind of reserves that for like monks behind the cloister, but they treat the laity like ignorant children, and they don't give them an opportunity to grow. And I always said, if I'm going to have this vocation, I'm going to change that. And it might be just my little part of this, piece of the pie that I work within. But if that's all I can reach, if that's all I can do, then that's what I'll do. And I've been pretty successful so far. Those that need me have found me. And those that are not ready, well, they've got other things out there in the world for them. They don't need me.
Exactly. That's a wonderfully sane attitude. So many people have different things to offer. And I mean, each of us should be large enough in our minds and hearts to embrace a multitude of virtues as they appear in 1,000 contexts. That to me is happiness, that you're not hung up on one thing, that you're not stuck with one thing. Which is not to say that as individuals, we should not have the right to prefer and to cherish certain things above all others, as long as we don't want to do harm or annul or ghost out of existence the others. That whole problem of the other, right? That's the fundamental issue that people suffer from.
Well, I mean, and Christianity inherited that, unfortunately, from the Jewish tradition. Ancient Judaism was very much built upon a self-identity in which they were set apart from the rest of the world. And I think Christianity sort of adopted some of that mentality.
I think you're right. Yeah. And so I would say that the Abrahamic religions, unique, powerful. I was born into the tradition. I admire it. I love it. But I also feel that it, in contrast, let's say, to Hinduism, has brought with it a psychological tendency, framework, disposition toward fanaticism, exclusivism, dogmatism, whereas in the Indian traditions, I mean, not to say, they fight, they have arguments, they kill each other from time to time, but the essential teachings of Hindu, I will share in 1 second, a fundamental experience I had when I was about 19 years old. I was wandering around Manhattan. I lived in Queens, and I bumped into a place called the Vedanta Society on 71st Street, Manhattan. I had begun to read a little bit about Hindu philosophy. So I walked into this place, and the first thing I see written on the wall of a beautiful painting, forget the painting, the content, but I remember what was written. Truth is one. People call it by different names. That's not exactly. It was men call it variously. Why men? Men and women, okay? People.
Right.
That to me said, wow, that sounded completely and totally on the ball and correct, you see. And I've never changed. That has been my fundamental intuition. It's not just an idea that I picked up. I resonated with it. It felt like this was the truth to me. And it's like there are all different kinds of art. There's surrealism, there is realism, portrait painting, landscape painting, abstract. They're all different facets of the glories of the visual imagination.
Yes.
What's wrong with that? Why not think like that in the realm of religion? See, that's how I see the
Can you
parallel.
imagine where religion would be today if that was if that was the foundation instead of this exclusivity approach that they've taken?
Yeah.
We'd be so much further along spiritually. I think we'd be far more advanced on that level.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because we would see each other as filling or being complementary rather than antagonistic.
Yeah.
I have written 2 books about levitation. And recently I've come across some books about Tibetan Buddhist levitation. And the artwork there, the paintings of the levitators go back to the 17th century. And they're beautiful paintings. The author's name of the book is Mullen. I've forgotten his first name. But here's the difference. The Catholic saints are flying in a bliss of love and ecstatic. It's usually the sight or the thought of some sacred item that will trigger a mystical episode in the Catholic saint.
Yes.
But with the Tibetan stuff, I was shocked and delighted and amused to notice that many of the great masters levitate and practice eroticism. And so here you have a complete acceptance of the erotic dimension of human experience. It is part of a sacred tradition, part of a sacred philosophy, and it doesn't have to deal with this problem that Freud confronted us with, that we're constantly at war with our sexuality. And that screws us up big time in many, many, many ways, you see.
I agree completely.
Anyway, I'm just making a case here. But again, I think that all the religions have different ways of reflecting. And the more we learn, the more we explore, the better. It should be more enriching, the whole process. And if we started thinking like that, well, we'd be a whole lot better off in many, many ways, you see.
There's no question about that. And I mean, I think that definitely is a good way of illustrating the first point. You know, what does it mean to have this intelligent, super technical entity that sort of has almost divine-like capabilities and is able, I like your term super physical, because that really does nail in the concept of what these things are. It's like there's a physical component, but it seems like so much far beyond that, almost, Dr. Grosso, almost to the point of how the Bible describes the resurrected body of Jesus, which is super physical.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm definitely, I have to say, let me just share this thought because you raised the point about the phenomenon of the Marian visions in 1917 in Fatima. Now, the thought that passed my mind was, again, I want to stress this for listeners, a speculation. I don't believe this. I don't know that it's true. But how it appeared to me at that moment as I was reading about the zigzag motion, I said, could it be that the aliens who are now occupying our space, could easily be thousands of years more evolved as a civilization than our little piker of 5,000 years that we have behind us.
Mm-hmm.
Might they have evolved so technically and so spiritually that they have come back to a planet Earth and try to sort of coax us into a more sophisticated belief by backing up and even engineering some of the visionary experience in the different religions that teach basic lessons of spirituality. And that basically again, I don't believe this is so, but the apparitions of the Virgin that those children saw for every month for 6 months, they came and they made a promise, come here, we're going to come back 6 times, and they did. But what seems to be happening, what could be happening there is that these agents or old, highly evolved, universe wandering entities that come into the earth from time to time are just playing along with us, with our primitive little myths, and that basically it was a projection, a technical projection, to seduce these kids into imagining they saw God and saw the ultimate, and to try to affect people. And they did. I mean, among those 70,000 were a lot of Portuguese skeptics who were completely convinced the whole thing was a con, and had their minds blown. And so that's a thought that I don't know it's true, but it's a speculative possibility that highly advanced civilizations. The other thing, by the way, that strikes me about the UFO scene is the multiplicity of types of aliens.
Yes.
It's not just one. And moreover, since they have been appearing at least since the 1890s and probably much earlier in human history, they keep changing. I mean, there are contactees, there are abductions, there are all kinds of aspects. Hundreds of different types of aliens have been seen. Tall Nordic ones, little guys, little grays.
The lizards, the
reptilian,
mantis.
the reptilian. Yeah.
So what is going on there? I don't know the answer, but it's enough to keep you awake at night thinking.
Well, Dr. Grosso, I think he was a defense minister in Israel, if I'm not mistaken, but he was referring to, or made an announcement. He's from what I understand, a well-respected a minister of defense in Israel that worked many years, and I think he was retired by this point, but he came forward publicly and said that there's a galactic federation.
There was one in Canada who said that.
Was it? Maybe I'm thinking of the one in Canada, but there's one in Israel though that had very similar ideas to what was being said. But yeah, there were two. Both were government officials,
right?
Which was a bizarre thing, to hear government people talking this way, even if they're retired, because it never. They always would dismiss it. Always would treat it like, oh, this is silliness, And now they're taking it quite seriously, which has me thinking. Which brings us, I guess, to our next point here. The second point in your article states, this is the second fact that can change everything. The entity emerged into full view almost in tandem with the appearance and use of nuclear weaponry mid-20th century. The UFOs seem curious and concerned. I find that interesting too, because there's a Star Trek. I'm a big Star Trek fan, and there's a Star Trek movie where what gets the aliens aware of Earth, and it turns out that it's the Vulcans, Spock's character's species. The Vulcans are the first ones to discover us in this movie. I think it's Star Trek First Contact is the one I'm talking about. It's warp drive. It's the first time that they're able to travel at above the speed of light. Dr. Cochrane, the character, has invented the warp drive, and they used it, and the Vulcans pick this up, and then they come over, and that's what makes them make contact. And of course, in Star Trek, there's this sort of rule that everyone follows in the Federation called the Prime Directive that states that you can't interfere with a society until they have reached the point of warp capability where they're going to be leaving their planet to see other worlds anyway. So at that point, they're already now at a level where they have to communicate with other species and out there. But it got me thinking about that, because I mean, of course, that's fiction, but it got me thinking about, what if there's some kind of real world equivalent here? Or is this an archetype that's revealing something to us at a deeper level, that these stories are being written almost subconsciously from some connection that the writers have with maybe something that's influencing them? But it sort of hit home a little bit in the sense that nuclear power, you know, it kind of came out of nowhere. You know, here we are, pre-industrial, okay, 1800s. And even though we developed things like steam and locomotive, you know, we had some technology that was developed over time. We really fundamentally did not live terribly different in the 1800s than we did even, you know, 10,000 years before that, outside of just maybe, you know, getting better with tools and, you know, having more sophisticated language, the ability to record knowledge. You know, these are things that kind of develop sophistication. But as far as technology goes, not a whole lot of dramatic change in terms of what was physically possible. And then all of a sudden you get to the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and then you have the transistor turns into the microprocessor. You get these microchips. You open up your computer today, that does not even look like something that could even remotely have been created by a human being. It makes you wonder, was this all reversed engineered technology that was discovered perhaps at Roswell and the Roswell crash? It gets the wheels turning. But what would have brought them over? Well, what was going on around Roswell? It was the World War II and Hiroshima and the testing and the actual use, the dropping of the A-bomb on Hiroshima. It makes me wonder. So clearly you're on this wavelength because you put it in the article, but I'd like for you, perhaps, Dr. Grosso, to expand upon your thoughts on that.
Well, I really don't have any thoughts to say other than what I've read. And I mean, it's the history of it is a fact. There's the book that I mentioned there. You cited his name. I've forgotten it, but I have it in my library. It's this thick, and it's a guy whose father was working in the atomic weapon business, so to speak.
Yes, and
knew the scene inside and out, and he makes the case. And not only he, it was noticed by a bunch of writers that the intensification, the modern age of the UFO or UAP phenomenon begins really right about the time of the first explosions and right in the same area. And it makes perfectly good sense.
It's like we got somebody's attention.
Yeah. I mean, if in fact we have been observed all these years by an advanced intelligence technology, we don't even know that it's a technology in any sense that we understand the word, by the way. And I'm certainly not a person who believes that these are spacecraft that are coming from other galaxies. I'm more inclined, again, I don't know. Right. I'm much more inclined to suspect that what we're witnessing in the UFO phenomenon is an interdimensional. That makes a whole lot more sense to me, given the fact that unless, their technologies have been evolved in the maybe millions of years of technological evolution that enable living sentient beings to travel around the universe at unbelievable, rates. But it just seems to me that this is a plausible thing to consider. And that even the thought of it, that our entire religious history has been shaped by an external intelligence trying to get us, to coax us into a more evolved human sensibility, is really it's sort of what you were driving at, Brian, a moment ago. It's just a shocking idea.
Well, it is. And it's like, even warp drive in the Star Trek sense is a remarkably inefficient way to travel when you think about it. If you're dealing with something that we know definitively science has confirmed that there are places in this galaxy, in this universe that are billions of years older than here.
Right.
And we also know that planets seem to be the norm. As far as looking out there, and now we can detect exoplanets, and it seems like almost every star has one,
Right.
Or several actually. So it stands to reason that in a amount of space that we're talking about here, which is this immeasurable universe, that there would be somewhere in the part of the universe that's billions of years older than it is here, that there would at least be one planet with life that evolved to a sophisticated level that would be billions of years ahead of us. And what would that look like? What would their understanding of physics be at that point? I'm not so sure you need a spaceship to travel at faster than light speeds, because again, even with faster than light travel, you're talking distances that would still be ridiculously far.
Right. Exactly.
Interdimensional, though, if you could literally pass through a portal, for example, and go from one place to the next, that actually makes a lot of sense if you have the physical know-how to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And there are so many stories that one reads in the literature of UFOs, UAPs, and other strange manifestations is so extensive. And again, you read stories of entities just somehow ripping apart the fabric of ordinary time and space and presenting themselves there. Ray Hernandez, I don't know if you know his name, he's written a couple of books, is working on some new books on UFOs, but do you know the name?
I'm familiar with the name. I don't know much about his work, but
okay,
I do know the name.
He's written a book, it's a collection, Beyond UFOs, but he had the most astonishing experience. I've met him, he's a lawyer, a totally sane, ordinary guy who knew nothing about any of this stuff, had no interest, but he had a sick dog, and I'll tell you the story in 1 minute. One night, an energy entity, angel-like entity, suddenly was in his house with him, snatched the dog and his wife, and disappeared. And the person who witnessed this and described it to me just went unconscious. And when he woke back up, there was his wife, and there was the dog back. The dog was perfectly healed. He brought the dog to a doctor who had treated him. The doctor said, this dog was dying. It's in perfect health now. It lived for several years.
Wow.
Now, there are stories like that suggest to my mind, just like an envelope, just something that's just broken through, and then they disappear. So this business of another dimension, how do we suddenly find ourselves in a dream? And then from a dream, we're back awake. It's effortless.
Yeah.
It seems like it's not like you're traveling millions of miles, billions of miles, which would take billions of, many, many years at the speed of light. It's more like waking up. And the closeness, one of the ideas that I like to ponder is how close the extraordinary is. How often you read stories of people who are walking along, as it were, and in a second, they're in another world.
Yeah.
It might happen through a near-death experience. It might happen when you're perfectly sober and sane, because there are stories like that, where people just step into another reality.
Right.
There could be psychedelics could come in. There could be moments of inspiration. But the closeness, the intimacy, and the nearness of the transcendent is an idea that fascinates me, that almost anything is liable to happen that could trigger a sudden door opens and there you are. And then the door closes, you see, as it happened with my friend and his dog.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, it's a strange world we're living in.
Well, that brings us actually to the third point. We've kind of covered this. And the third point, the third fact that you write that could change everything is the entity as a shapeshifter. It possesses the magical power to appear in different forms, adapting itself to specific cultural and existential needs, and to make itself vanish at will. So, yes, that does sound a lot more like some kind of interdimensional capability than it would be sort of like space travel in the traditional sense of the term, like a spaceship going through outer space at vast distances and incredible speeds. It seems like it's much further beyond than the current technology that we can even conceive of as being futuristic.
Yes. You know, I have to say that the idea that what you read of mine was inspired by John Mack in his book. He's written at least 2 books on his UFO abduction investigations. And in his first book entitled Alien Abductions, I believe, he has example after example of illustrating this shape-shifting thing. And so many common UFO or UAP sightings begin with a dot of light. And then out of that dot, almost anything. I mean, if you take that dot as the starting point, it becomes in countless story after story after story, the starting point for something completely unexpected and strange. And so the shape-shifting notion, I mean, what is the greatest shapeshifter in all of us? Our own minds.
Oh, yes.
Our own imaginations. So we don't know how advanced that can become in the evolution of the evolution of consciousness, not human. I mean, assuming that consciousness has appeared in the universe before the planet Earth came forth with life. Once you make that assumption and add the notion of great lengths of time for the maturation of those potential powers, almost anything becomes possible. And I'm not just speculating wildly, but we have pointers in that direction. We have all the UFO experiences. We have the very terrestrial evidence of parapsychology. And we have the history of spirituality on Earth. We have the great saints. We have Jesus. We have Buddha. We have Brian. We have Michael. We have all of us here, you see, who have extraordinary experiences, or might. So I'm totally open. I like your word openness. You kept using the word open before.
Yeah.
That's what we need. We need to cultivate openness in order to facilitate this tremendous process that's going on.
Well, it makes me wonder about, you're talking about the mind and we tend to perceive ourselves to be physical creatures with a non-corporeal component, which is the mind and our emotions. And we kind of feel almost like they're separate. And then, those of us who are spiritual tend to even take it one step further and say that there's 3 levels of incorporeality, which would be, the mind, or the world of thought, emotions, those things that we feel, and then spirit or soul, this spiritual component, this eternal quality that sort of connects us to everything else. But what if we have it in reverse? What if we are not physical at all, and that we're entirely incorporeal, and yet we project corporeality into what seems to be a physical plane of existence, which is what we think we know the universe to be. But I mean, we don't really understand what the universe is. We think we know, we have an idea about energy and geometry, but we don't even really understand what gravity is. I mean, we really don't. Science doesn't really have a full grasp on those types of things. So could it possibly be that, a species or a civilization that's billions of years ahead of us in evolution has now realized that the way that you master the universe is that, you're entirely incorporeal to begin with, and that you can project corporeal reality?
Yeah, well, we see signs of that. And in a way, the dream is one of the great mysteries, right?
Yeah.
We project, we spend a third of our lives in the dream world. And there again, that intimacy, that closeness, I remember, and here seems an appropriate place to report this experience I had. Yeah. I was a student on the BMT in New York City many, many years ago when I was a young man, 18 years old, and on my way to college, to school, which was in the Bronx. And I was tired. I was being a good student. I was up all night preparing for an exam. I kind of nodded out on the train, on the BMT. It was an elevated train, a rocking train. And then suddenly I saw a vision of Christ right in front of me. Oh. A beautiful vision. He was right in front of me. A face. There was no definite. It was just there suddenly. And I never forgot it. I didn't know what it was for. I had no religious thoughts in me at the time. But here it is, many decades later. I still remember exactly the feeling and the look of it. It just popped in. Now you might say, I don't know why. And maybe no one will ever know why. But it could be anything from some little glitch in the brain at that moment. My brain was just that we're in this world. We're surrounded by a universe of spirit, forms, archetypes. But our brains and our bodies, what we call our bodies at any rate, are focused on bodily survival and bodily success and all of that. So our brains are focused on what we call the physical world.
Yeah. But
yeah, it doesn't take much to get distracted from what appears to be physical and to slip suddenly into a visionary universe, as I did for a split second many years ago. And it was so real and so interesting that I still remember it. So, but as far as the unreality of the physical, there are many philosophical views that support that. I mean, the panpsychist, idealism is another form, various forms. And let's face it, whatever we experience is filtered through our minds.
Everything.
I'm looking at this very fancy machine and your face on this screen, but it's still filtered through my mind.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing only what my mind permits me to see. And then I have memories. And then, of course, if we really want to get into what interests me also are those indications that how our minds can physically, psychokinetically transform reality. I mean, that would be consistent with your emphasis on the malleability of the physical and the transcendent potentialities of the mind.
Yes.
Because we see hints of it. I mean, it's in healings, all the marvelous stories of healings that I've been collecting for years. There are all kinds of circumstances where that can happen. Extraordinary, again, it shows the malleability of the physical through the power of the imagination and the mind. But even if we grant the physicality some measure of objective reality, the ultimate aspect of us is mental. And, people, they wonder about, well, can there be life after death? Actually, you have only to look into your own mind and realize that your mind is not your brain. Your brain. If I hit you on the head, you're going to get a little dizzy, and you might see stars or something. But your mind is not physical. It's interrelated, entangled with the brain. So you already have an argument for life after death, just by that one observation.
Yes.
Because if my mind is not my body, when my body gets creamed by death, well, I'm still my mind, you see.
Yeah.
But we want individual specific examples proving that. And that's where we go into the topic of life after death.
Yeah.
And there's tons of evidence out there. It drives me nuts, Byron. The fact that Brian, sorry.
That's all right.
What drives me nuts?
What's that?
The unwillingness of so many people to look at the evidence of life after death. I've had friends and even family members, people that I love and that are wonderfully intelligent people, and they're gripped by a fear of death, and you cannot block them out of that fear.
Yeah.
And I say, look, you just haven't done your homework. Do some homework, and you will at least wake up to all kinds of evidence. apparitions, near-death experience, reincarnation memories, all kinds of experiences that certainly strongly suggest the reality of life after death.
Or at the very least, that something is going on. Something that is.
There's a college, this is the University of Virginia. They have a whole department dedicated to NDEs and reincarnation. They've got like over thousands and thousands of files dating back, I think, 20, 30 years of people coming in testifying to their experiences. And I'm a survivor of an NDE myself. And I can definitely tell you, there's something after you shut your eyes for good. There's something there.
Yeah, so, I know that group. I hang out with them.
There you go. Yeah, I can't think of the name right now, but yeah, we've talked to someone else associated with them.
It's a department, the Division of Personality Studies, it's called.
Right, yes.
And originally it was Ian Stevenson who specialized in in reincarnation studies. And now we have an expert, Bruce Grayson has written a wonderful book called...
That's what I'm familiar with, Bruce.
After. It's all about after. And I can tell you, I know Bruce. He's a very quiet, studious, super smart guy. For 40 years, he's been studying the near-death experience. And he's written numerous papers, but he finally came out with a book on the subject. Read that, and you get your, I'm not saying you, but because you're already open-minded.
There is a documentary that focuses on that study as well. I think Bruce is in it, and it was very eye-opening.
Yeah. And my friend Ed Kelly, who's edited 3 major books. I'm in 2 of them. I was in the last one, but I got out because I didn't have time to finish my piece in the very last. So yeah, there's some very excellent literature out there. And by the way, it goes back a couple of 100 years. I mean, a lot of people have no idea how old and early, at least since the time of Anton Mesmer in the 18th century. They used to talk about the higher phenomena, mesmerism. And then, of course, people came and said, nah, that stuff is...
Well, that's where the term mesmerizing came from, isn't it?
Exactly. Anton Mesmer is a German... in the beginning, he thought that there was some kind of an energy that was physical. It was a physical explanation, but it's not. It's mental, completely mental.
Well, let's pause right there. We're going to take a break here in just a moment, for just a few moments, and we'll start our second segment here. We'll continue with the fourth and last point, and also bring Father Chris Yates in to add to the discussion, takes your questions and comments and calls. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of Vestiges After Dark. We're talking about UFOs and the implications of UFO disclosure with Dr. Michael Grosso. Wonderfully philosophical conversation, which includes science and religion, spirituality, among other things. When we come back here, we're going to finish the fourth and final point of his article, 4 Facts That Change Everything, and then start taking your questions and comments from the chat room all across the world, as well as from callers. Call into the show, 347-514-7150. That's 347-514-7150. Make sure to enter PIN number 376-8923. That's 376-8923 to get into the queue. Don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment. Well, looking at the fourth and final point, then we can start getting into the discussion here. The fourth point, Dr. Grosso, you write, the foregoing force us to ask what role this intelligent entity has played in the history of religions. Ever since Jacques Vallée and John Keel commented on the UFO features of the Fatima phenomenon, I've asked myself, is some evolved entity or cosmic club orchestrating visionary experiences that support the life of certain religions? I wonder how readers feel about registering these strange facts, whether with a sense of wonder or angst or... and then you leave a question mark right there. Very well done. And I think that brings us to a wonderful part in this, where we can start really getting into the subject matter, digesting it and discussing it. So that's a good question about religion, because if there is something that is instilling within us a concept of religion, and our entire spirituality and religious basis has been designed by some, as you say, cosmic club. That obviously has major ramifications in terms of people's paradigms and belief systems, that it could make, fragile ones even more so fragile. But it also opens up a wide range of possibilities that I find fascinating. It doesn't give me angst at all. Perhaps some wonder. Maybe it brings more questions than answers, but I'm curious as to what your thoughts are. Are you is the jury out for you, Dr. Grosso, or do you gravitate towards one or the other? Do you think religion as we understand it is fundamentally true? Or do you think that it's maybe been written for us and we've been sort of instilled with the ability to believe in these things that this cosmic club wants us to believe in? What are your thoughts on that?
And I definitely would not strongly. I raised this idea of a technical assistance, as it were, to the evolution of consciousness on our planet, owing to some external agency, purely as a possible inference. Again, as I look through the Bible, for example, the Pentecostal flames that appeared in the room, this was the very dawn, the beginning, the moment of that Christianity is born, just as the moment that in a sense, Judaism was born, when Moses sees this fire burning bush. That's a common thing in UFO lore. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I dug up a very fascinating study of UFOs in Africa, and it's full of flames that appear in bushes and in strange places that suddenly materialize into voices or deities or guidance or whatever. So it's hard for me to dismiss this as it's easy for me to reflect on this as a possibility, but there isn't enough evidence. But I was certainly struck by the reading about the Pentecost, because again, it's flames.
The similarities there, yeah.
Yeah, and the similarity is striking. They perch on top of the heads, and they're inspired, and they go out, and this is like the iconic moment of the rebirth of Christianity after Jesus is executed by the Romans. And then if you go through the literature of religion and mysticism, it's full of all kinds of experiences that could be construed as, in part at any rate, driven by or manipulated by some higher form of technology, or something where the divine and the technological merge together. I don't know. So I don't really know. All I know is that there are weird facts that have weird implications that few people are thinking about.
That's a good way to put it. I think that's a wise way to put it. Yeah.
And they all seem connected somehow.
Yeah, and they seem connected, and I can't block it out of my mind. The reason is I've got nothing else to do but hang around and write books and meditate on this stuff.
Well, I think it's in your nature as a philosopher.
I guess so. I guess that is something there, a curiosity, okay?
Yeah.
I mean, there are other things I like to do beside wonder about these mysteries, but I do admit being addicted to mystery and miracle. There are worse things you could be addicted to.
No question about that. Father Chris Yates is joining us also. Father, before we get to any questions from the chat or anybody that's listening in the audience, I'm sure you have some of your own with a topic this juicy. Let's face it.
Yeah, that's true. I had a reflection on, firstly, on your from the ether kind of point.
Oh, okay.
And actually, and we've touched on this obviously in the conversation as well, but I think there's kind of two poles of danger, or two poles of error is probably a better way of putting it, that people follow. I mean, on the one hand, there's the kind of universalistic, nothing matters, everything's going to be wonderful, it doesn't matter how you live your life, everyone's going to heaven, it's all going to be wonderful. That's one pole. And the other pole is the kind of ultra puritanical, actually, essentially faithless. You've got to be perfect, and you can't veer one way or the other. And I think, as ever, our Lord has an answer. I mean, in saying that the path is narrow, follow the narrow path. That's not the narrow-minded path. Mm-hmm. And it's not what the Puritans think it is either. It's not the take the path of taking no risk, of living your life so carefully that you actually can't live. You can't risk living. So I think that the narrow path is about avoiding the error of those two poles. On the one hand, because actually both of them say that you can't be saved. Because the one says nothing matters, and the other one says everything matters too much. Mm-hmm. And so, that was my kind of reflection on that.
Well, it's kind of like in Buddhism. I mean, Buddhism is based upon, central to the entire system of Buddhism is the theological principle of the middle path. Buddha's very story was built upon this. He came from a place of luxury. He lived in such a luxurious life as a prince that his father, who was the ruler of the land, kept him sheltered within the palace, and it was a very large space. And of course, there was walls that kept everything nasty out there from ever entering into the palace space. So as far as Siddhartha was concerned, growing up in this way, life was fairly perfect. He was, anytime anybody would die, he was immediately sheltered from that and not told the truth. But one day he gets a little curious and he wants to go out and see what's beyond the walls of the palace. And he does so. And then he realizes that outside it's just starvation, death, misery, and nothing like the perfect sheltered, wealthy life that he had grown accustomed to. And so along his journey, because he started sneaking out at night with one of his servants that would help him facilitate this, in one of his journeys out to explore the world outside and learn more about the truth of reality, he comes across some ascetics. These are people that are starving themselves. They're staying in almost permanent states of meditation, but they're really not terribly healthy because they're not eating and they're malnourished and everything else. And so he decides to try this because he's being told by some of them that this is the path to enlightenment. But he realizes in this that it almost killed him, and that neither pole, being too comfortable or being, completely rejecting comfort, was conducive to spiritual enlightenment. And that the reality is, if you want to attain to it, then we must walk the middle path, which is to not gravitate to any extremes of any kind, no dualities, no distinctions at all. Just focus on the path ahead and not worry too much about the extremes that we sort of naturally fall into. So, what you said kind of reminded me of that, and it shows again a parallel between two completely different systems, Christianity and Buddhism, and yet there's so much about them that is similar.
There's a variation on Eden, isn't it?
It is
the environment in which the innocent, the sense of innocent. I mean, I guess there's a subtle distinction, which is to say that Eden was a sort of genuine. Or the image of Eden was one of genuine innocence, yes. Whereas the one that you've described is actually one of a sort of sheltered. We know that there are evils outside of the walls, but it's being
he was kept from knowing ignorant. That. Yes, yeah. It is a lot like it's basically the Buddhist story of the Garden of Eden. It's the archetypes. We talked last time with Dr. Grosso when he was on the show last season, or maybe it was a couple seasons ago, actually. I think it was season 3. We talked about how archetypes are these pervading systems that sort of build our reality around us. And it makes sense that you'd see these themes all throughout religion, regardless of whether or not there was interaction, because the archetypes
that's what's so amazing about obviously I think the most important thing about Jesus is who he was rather than what he taught. But the amazing thing about what he taught is that those archetypes are held together. So you get the kind of the way to perdition, the path is broad. The way to heaven, the path is narrow. Yeah. Enter by the narrow gate. But you also get judge not, lest yourself shall be judged. So there's there is it wouldn't surprise those of us who think he's God. there is an amazing balance in this teaching that eschews the extremes of either side. And I mean, we've spoken about it a lot on this show. We live in such polarized times because we've never been so globally polarized, because we've not been able to be. I mean, because of technology, we're able to be far more.
I think it's the growing pains of globalization, to be honest with you. Yeah. I think that's what it is. It
actually reduces the number of opinions, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
So we've got this again. These are paradoxes. So you have connectivity and overwhelming ability. I'm sat here, halfway to Antarctica, speaking with you. So on the one hand, we've never been more able to share opinions, and yet the number of opinions is dwindling.
Well, it makes sense though, doesn't it? It makes sense though, doesn't it? Because globalization creates insecurity in the sense that the way that we have lived as a species has been historically quite sheltered in small little groups, and then they became empires. But even empires, in the grand scheme of things, is small compared to the globalization that we experience today, particularly with the ability to communicate. Like you're in Australia right now, I'm here in Georgia. It's instant communication. We can talk as if we're in the same room. As far as the audience is concerned, you're right here with me. That's unique to our times today, I think. And so I think that creates insecurity. So perhaps this gravitation towards polarities, the liberal versus the conservative, the this way of thinking versus that way of thinking, I think is people trying to find commonality to create a sense of security. I think that's where it comes from. Unfortunately, it leads to divisiveness, and then that has to be dealt with. And that's. I
think one of the things that I wanted to I'd ask Michael to reflect on really is that there's a philosophical principle that's been at the heart of all of this, which actually might be a kind of hopeful path for this polarization that's going on.
Yeah.
Which is that a lot of what's been said is about contingency. So, for example, we talk about physical phenomena, spacecraft or whatever that moves in ways we can't understand. Mm-hmm. Well, we perceive it that way because our thoughts of air travel are contingent on what we know about air travel.
Yeah, airplanes and helicopters and
so
birds.
That's a very basic level of contingency. But there's also to extrapolate it out and to be more Augustinian Aquinas about this. The arguments of contingency that all things are contingent on one. So again, going back to our polarization, the right is contingent on the left. That's how it's defined.
We're always defined by that which is dissimilar. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm just interested to think what you think about, because of course, I mean, I believe the argument from contingency that Aquinas puts forward, which is to say there must be one on whom nothing is contingent, and that is God. It's all part of the five great arguments. The existence of God. So I wondered what you thought about sort of contingency in the context of what you've been speaking about in that article.
I'm not sure what your philosophical point is there. I mean, while you were talking, I was thinking of the Buddhist notion of voidness, which is essentially a notion to go back to Brian's term before, of openness, and so the extremes that seems to be racking the planet today. Part of it is, not so philosophical, but just economic. I mean, there's a wild inequity of wealth on this planet. These are physical things. Brian, you said we're not physical, but we do get hungry.
Yeah.
We have to feed ourselves. And there's an enormous inequity that is expanding. I mean, the numbers of people on the planet are, of course, steadily increasing. What is it, 8 billion now do we have?
I think we're close to 9 now. I think we're close to 9. I could be wrong on that.
And we are, there's this whole question, very practical questions of sustainability. We don't have enough. It's the inequity, I think, is the problem. Now, I don't know how inequity fits into your notion, Chris, of contingency, but
I'm not sure I agree with your premise, mind you. I mean, I think. Yes, we've got a higher population than ever on Earth, but actually the percentage.
It's actually 8 billion. I'm sorry, you're right.
The percentage of people in absolute poverty has gone down, not up.
Well, but there's still people suffering all over the place, and I don't.
There's differential distribution. That's not an argument I'm making, but I think to suggest that the argument we're running out of resources, there's too many people, is not backed up by the fact that more people have been raised out of absolute poverty in the past 30 years than anybody could have predicted. mainly because of the free market, of course.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, I mean, this is one factor, but no, I don't have any I pretty much, I don't have an answer for how to resolve all of this. Okay. And I'm not sure what exactly the point that you're making, Chris, about the contingency. Again, I mean, it's not quite clear what you're driving at.
Well, if I extend it a bit further, I'd say that, ideas are contingent on other ideas as well. And so, I mean, I guess that, I'm sort of opposed to a universalism that says, all paths are the same or they're all equal.
Oh no, I would agree. They're not all the same, and they are not, and they do not all produce the same kind of spiritual experiences, artistic, musical. There are all kinds of differences. But I do not believe that there is one creed that is the most important, the most revealing, and the truest. Lots of people are going to believe that. I mean, if it's the same thing in art. I mean, while Mondrian was discovering his world of abstractions, and it was a breakthrough for him, and that's where art was for him. Fine, but at no point did I hear him say, all the other artists that have come before me are worthless or are destined to be damned, you say. I'm definitely disinclined to embrace any single-minded approach. I mean, a single-minded approach for yourself, your own self-discipline, fine. But to say that unless I do it, I'm lost or I'm damned or I'm screwed up, I don't go along with that at all. So in that sense, I am a universalist and not well, I don't know how you would characterize a one-offness.
I like that one-offness.
I'm not trying to convince. I'm only interested in understanding where you're coming from. So just because actually, refreshingly, this show is interested in how people think, not trying to tell them what to think.
That's the whole point of this show. Yes.
Yeah, all opinions are valued here.
Yeah. Sister Mary Joan and Father Chris, speaking of all opinions, I'd like to hear what the audience has for Dr. Grosso tonight. I'm sure there's many questions coming in.
Well, Father Chris was kind enough to paste a few questions to the chat room on the Zoom here.
I did see that there were many coming in for me. Right. I'll answer those in the third.
Times and names and nothing else.
Yeah, I will answer the ones for me in the third segment. But while we have Dr. Grosso with us in this hour, let's go ahead and go with the ones that were asked to him.
We got one from Tiffany. So I have a question for Dr. Grosso. He mentioned expanding consciousness with marijuana use. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if he's seen success with psilocybin treatment, mushrooms, for anxiety and trauma.
I have explored almost all of the psychedelics. And
I think you mentioned that when you were on before.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on that in the sense that I didn't take them for psychotherapeutic purposes. And I find ordinary, rational, being awake, anxiety producing. And no, I'm kidding. Actually, no, I have always explored these substances out of a fullness of a sense of adventure. So I'm not, I don't take a psychotherapeutic approach, but I can see how these, I'm open to the possibility if that's the way it works for certain people. And if the person or Tiffany has had a positive experience and she's just looking for some confirmation, why not? You see, if it opens you up in some way to reduce your anxiety, it just seems to me that, I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, let's go on to the next one. What do we have next?
All right. We got one from Kiki. Does Dr. Grosso think that there are interdimensional portals on Earth like Amaru Moru in Peru?
Yeah, I don't know what that is. And I don't think that it's just a possibility that I'm entertaining, that there are these portals and these different... I know for sure that it makes perfectly good sense to say that... we have a kind of everyday model for another world, namely the dream. We underestimate the importance of our dream life and the reality of dreams. And then we also have, of course, the reported visionary experiences of various the saints and psychics and mediums. So there's a lot of literature and out there describing altered states of consciousness that can be studied and explored, and they're all have serve some kind of purpose. But it depends on you. You have to do it in your own way, with your own questions, and satisfy your own curiosities there. That's what I would say about these substances.
And I would say if you're going to experiment in them to try to have a mystical type experience, make sure you don't do it by yourself, just in case you have a bad reaction.
And as Amanda Morris pointed out,
having to say that as a disclaimer,
but also,
don't do that stuff by yourself for the first time.
But also, as Amanda Morris pointed out, and keep in mind, my understanding is, we can ask her when she comes on in April, but my understanding is that she's not against at all marijuana use or anything like that, but she definitely is against young undeveloped minds using it. So before the age of 22, it seems that it has very negative effects on brain development. So it seems like it needs a mature mind to be able to utilize it in an effective way. I'm sure there's probably people that disagree with that, but I tend to, having worked in psychology and have done some clinical work, I can say that I've had many clients that can trace back psychotic a psychosis or an acute psychosis to overusing hallucinogenic substances when they were younger and early teens or mid-teens. Yeah. So I would say be careful with it. Yeah.
Let me just say that I did not smoke marijuana until I got to graduate school.
Well, there you go. So, and you probably already had a very developed mind, Doctor.
I remember the night that I was with a bunch of buddies of mine, and they passed 9 joints around. And I'm smoking away, and I knew how to inhale. Absolutely nothing happened. And so somebody said, let's go downstairs and for a walk on Broadway. This is near Columbia University.
Yeah.
So I said, sure. The minute I got downstairs, I thought I was in La La Land. People looked like giants.
Wow.
I was terrified. I thought I was disappearing. And then my buddies realized that, and they started to say, did anybody see Mike around here? And they started needling me they didn't realize how paranoid I was, that I felt myself, but anyway, it only lasted the terror about a half an hour.
Yeah.
And then someone said, let's go eat something, you'll feel better.
Right.
Yes.
Always with the food.
So I was a late bloomer on that field.
Well, that's probably not a bad thing. If at least that's the studies that they're pushing out right now, is that it seems to have a negative impact on brain development.
Oh, I can imagine that. I'm glad that I was a late bloomer.
Yeah.
in that regard, at any rate.
Certainly.
I'm told that incense has a mildly hallucinogenic effect. So
yes,
all the more reason that people should come to high mass.
There you go. Oh, if you want hallucinogenic incense, just have Sister Mary Joan run your sensor.
I spare no expense when it comes to the smoke.
She does not.
I want to make sure we're all good and covered.
And our chapel's quite small, and not a lot of ventilation, so we all leave there pretty happy.
Frankincense, baby.
What's our next one, Sister?
So I believe South Philly Lily.
Okay.
I love that name.
That's good, yeah.
If there is intelligent life somewhere out there, do you think they have a moral, religious hierarchy like we do? I've always wondered what the chances are that they too answer to the Creator/God. I'd also be curious to know if the panel believes that if an alien race does exist, if they too were created by God as He created man.
Well, I'll answer that part after Dr. Grosso has a chance at it. So I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Again, that's not a question
Yeah.
A philosopher has to know when he doesn't know. Okay.
I don't think any of us know.
And I don't know, okay, to any of that, what's going on out there. I'm assuming my inference, my assumption, my guess, or whatever, is that there is one supreme consciousness that has been revealed, or that exhibits itself in different ways through, if there are different civilizations, just like our world, we have a variety of expressions, manifestations of art, of spirituality, the breaking up of the one into the multitude of perspectives, of human perspectives, of an organism's perspective. I believe that this divine, fundamental, universal consciousness is expressed in animal life. Animals are conscious. All living creatures, and possibly even the inanimate, has some a measure of malleable awareness or consciousness. But every unique entity will have a unique perspective and way to interpret that fundamental fact of transcendent illumination. But again, that's just my theory, hypothesis. Call it an insight, perhaps. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's an error. But that's how I see it.
Oh, that's wise. For my part of the question, I agree with what Dr. Grosso just said, and there is no way to definitively know in any observable sense, but we can use theology and philosophical deduction by theology to sort of answer it from a Judeo-Christian perspective, and that's the one I can give you, which would be that we know theologically, if we can say Christian theology is entirely true, then we would say that because theology states that God created all things, then yes, everything out there, even in other galaxies, is still created by the same God. So that all things, I mean, even the Nicene Creed, it's all were created through Him, right? All were created for Him. It's entirely made by God. So Judeo-Christian theology would say, yes, it's all their God is our God. It's all the same God. Now, whether or not they have theological or religious belief systems is kind of in a branch of exotheology. It's not really a thing, but there's something that in the Vatican they have debated certain topics, like, for example, if Jesus came to save us from our sins and died for our sins so that we could be made purified and made perfect as He is perfect, so that we can return to our primordial Garden of Eden state, then the question is, was humanity, in terms of Homo sapien on the planet Earth, were we the only ones that fell? Or is this talking about a universal condition? Is the entire universe impacted by the fall, or is it just life here on this planet? And then it begs the question, was the Garden of Eden a real place that happened here on Earth, or is the Garden of Eden some spiritual reality that sort of exists interdimensionally across the entirety of the universe? These are questions that come up in exotheology. No one really has the absolute answers on this because we don't really get into that. Scripture doesn't really get into those kinds of details. You can infer certain things, but there's only so far you can go. But I would say that there would be, if spirituality is a universal thing, which I do think it is, then I would say that any living being in this universe would have some relationship to it that would, as Dr. Grosso pointed out, would be relative to their understanding.
Yeah. And also their ambition and their context and what happens to them in the course of life. It depends on their parents, on their teachers, and all the things that influence us and color the way we perceive the world.
Well, let's assume for a moment that a species out there evolved from a much more docile lower animal. I mean, if we evolve from primates are pretty violent, hostile creatures. They're probably more violent than many species on the planet Earth. But what if we had evolved from a more docile creature? And would that mean that if a more docile creature could evolve to the level of intellect that we now possess, could that imply that they would have a higher ethical, moral standard naturally built within them, being, for all intents and purposes, better people to each other? And if that's the case out there somewhere in the universe where there's a planet that has a higher moral or ethical foundation than we do here on this planet, would their religion reflect that? I mean, our religion is based upon the forgiveness of sins in Christianity, and that's just one religion among countless others here on this planet that see the problem of evil differently. But when you really break it down, every religion's trying to resolve the problem of evil. They define evil differently. For Christians, evil is behavior. For Buddhists, evil's more about attachment. It's more about ignorance. But both are evil, and they would use the word. In fact, I would say in Buddhism, there's only one sin, and that is to be ignorant. But if you were out there somewhere in the galaxy, evolved from a very different creature, with a higher moral standard than the one that we have on this planet, I mean, you might not need a religion that is so focused on being a good person, because you might already be living at a high standard. I mean, the possibilities are endless, and it just turns into just intellectual speculation after a certain point. There's no real way to answer that. Father Chris, I don't know.
To be very theological about it, though, we could say, well, such creatures do exist on Earth. They're animals. And so, you do get some talk about this in Aquinas. He talks about an animal soul as opposed to a human soul, which is a rational soul. Yeah. And, the kind of conclusion certainly from the Christian theological point of view is that, human beings have the capacity to sin, whereas animals don't. And the reason we have a capacity to sin is because we've been created uniquely by God to know good from evil, and therefore to be able to make a choice. And so, but it's also why we've said this before on the show. I mean, that's why, so much ink was spilt and arguments were had, time was spent on the what of Jesus. What was Jesus? And of course, orthodoxy with a capital O with a small o, says that Jesus is human and divine, all man, all God. This is the sort of remedy, which is about, how human beings can be saved. There's no question. There's no sort of. I don't think there's any tradition that talks about anyone else being saved in that manner. So now, I don't want to go against your other point, which is to say all things were created by God. So if there's planets out there with intelligent life on them, they were created by God, the same God.
But did they fall the same way? And that's really the question.
Because it's possible, just as other creatures on this earth have been created with a different moral dimension than us. Yeah, it's possible that they were created with a different moral dimension.
So it could be. That a species that didn't make let's just take the Judeo-Christian story for face value and say that's the universal truth. Let's just assume that for a moment. Then if man, if Homo sapien is what, fell from grace in the Garden of Eden, then if you had another planet out there where that didn't happen, they wouldn't technically need Jesus in the same way.
No, well, they wouldn't need to be saved from their sins.
Right.
But they'd still be created and have their ultimate destiny in the same God.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, theologically.
Just like, we talk about the angels who don't have the opportunity for forgiveness. Right. Because their disobedience is with full knowledge and full cooperation, unlike ours. Yeah. And so, so I think the answer would depend. What I would be very skeptical about, theologically speaking, is that there'd be any other sacrifice. So if there was a need for redemption of anything in the cosmos, it's achieved through the cross.
And would it have, and then here we get into another one, would the crucifixion, the death and resurrection that occurred here on this planet work across the entirety of the universe, or would there have to be a different incarnation on their planet with dealing with those situations separately?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm rejecting. I'm saying no way.
It can't be that.
And the reason I'm saying no way, not just because it kind of upsets me, because it doesn't at all, but because the other nature of Jesus Christ is that he's God. And therefore, if there is a redemption that's achieved by God, then that's a universal redemption.
So would they have our story?
Yeah, I mean, well, but in a way, it doesn't matter. You see, what matters is that the story of God is this.
Well, yeah, but the question was, would they have a theology? Would they,
sure.
Yeah, and so if they had a theology and a religious belief system, they would probably need some kind of, at least in our mindset, they would need some kind of whatever their equivalent of literature is, to tell the story of what happened.
And they may be much further on than us in that regard. Who knows?
We don't know.
We don't know.
There's no way to know.
Cosmos is just a bookshelf full of books by the same author, but they're different stories.
That's how I've always looked at it. And I would actually say that to reject absolute universalism, which I do reject absolute universalism. There's parts of me that's universal, but
from the same author, the same creator.
And I would say along those lines that not all the books are as useful as other books.
Right.
They all tell the truth. Yeah, I think they all tell the truth. I think some are devoid of the extent of that truth. Some are far more complex and more useful in that regard. So I hope that answers the question. Let's see if we could probably take one or two more before the top of the hour when Dr. Grosso has to leave us. So do we have any others?
Those are the ones I had. There may be some more in the chat room since we started. To go back and look.
Father Chris, did you see any that were for Dr. Grosso
I put those ones in the chat room, and then I've been lost in this discussion.
Right. I didn't see anything any more specifically for Dr. Grosso, but there was a comment back further in the thread asking about someone who had an experience with what they would consider the Men in Black. And I think he was interested in your thoughts, Bishop, actually, as to what that could be. Do you think that's a real phenomenon? Plenty of people have experienced it.
Well, I mean, that's
before the movies came out. So,
what do you think, Dr. Grosso, on the Men in Black phenomenon?
I have, read fairly extensively, and my impression is that there's probably what I can get out of it, that it's some government personalities with an eerie overtone to it that makes the whole Men in Black phenomenon so weird, but it's just one of the weird aspects of the whole UFO story that there's something going on there, and there are just lots of specific stories, and you don't know whether or not these stories are psychologically partly true and then interpreted in words that they heard from someone else. You don't know enough about it. So, but there's something weird going on with those Men in Black. But it does seem to have something to do with preventing people, or the public at any rate, from being fully aware of the nature of the reality, the UFO reality. As far as I know, I haven't heard too much about the Men in Black lately.
You're right. I haven't heard any recent encounters with them either. Maybe with disclosure coming and all that.
Exactly. It could be changed. I mean, that is my impression of the UFO story. It's changing all of the time.
Why do you think?
It would be plausible that there'd be some branch of the government that would research, investigate, or however you
and suppress it. But let's say for a moment it is about suppression. Okay. Let's speculate a little bit, Dr. Grosso, on this one. What do you think, what can you come up with in your mind would be a reason to suppress this and right now, all of a sudden start releasing it to the public? What do you think's changed?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think the answer to that is that the evidence is so many people are having experiences, and so many. I mean, there's that book by Leslie Kean came out, which consists of mainly military and pilot personnel who are reporting about their. You cannot read that book and dismiss the whole idea. So the information is piling up. There's tons of it. I have a pretty huge library, and I have several upstairs. I have, I'd say, 3 shelves of books I've been collecting on this subject. Mm-hmm. It's endlessly written about, talked about, experienced by so many people. So I think they've finally decided that we can't stop this anymore. We're going to have to gradually let people know. And the one fact that strikes me as crucial is it's very clear that we are being visited almost on a daily basis and being seen constantly performing operations in the air that are physically and technologically way beyond anything that human beings can do. That is perfectly clear. And the implications of that, we don't know what they are, but they're huge. That's the way I would put it. We don't know what that implies exactly, but whatever it implies, it's a major change in our consciousness. We have to face the fact that there's a presence and an intelligence operating on a daily basis in our world. We don't know to what degree they have penetrated into our culture. There are lots of stories there. I'm not completely convinced that there are aliens walking around. A lot of people believe that, or half, mutants that are half alien, half human. Maybe. It's not. I mean, it's not inconceivable.
Yeah.
But that part I'm a little hesitant to go along with. But the technology of their presence is a fact. And I myself had an experience in 1971 which altered my whole perception of reality, which I told you about, I think, on our last meeting.
Yes.
But so I had this encounter, and I would call it a contact experience. It wasn't just a sighting, because that light entity knew what I was doing in my house with my girlfriend, and the connection with the church was all there. They knew what was going on. We were listening to John Coltrane, the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. Okay, an incredible piece of music, by the way. You can't listen to that music without being stoned out of your head, or else you turn it off and run because you can't take it.
Right.
But Jane and I, we were happily, madly in love, and listening to that music when suddenly there it came. And then there was a third person on the roof when we went up the roof that saw the same thing. So it's that's all I know for sure, that there's a technical intelligence out there that's completely beyond. It didn't move around like as far as I was concerned, I was watching a thought in action that assumed a light form. There was no craft. It was just light, sparkles, dancing around, talking to us, as it were. And just at the moment when we were listening to that intensely jazz but spiritual music, John Coltrane is quite an interesting character. Well, he still is, wherever he is.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about that. Dr. Grosso, well, thank you so much for being with us. It's always a pleasure, and I love our conversations.
Well, I enjoyed it very much, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
I look forward to it.
Come back,
you you have an open invitation anytime you want to come on. Yes.
Okay,
always good conversation. Take care, sir.
Thank you so much.
And let me press the right button to get out of here. I don't know how these things. Leave, it says.
Don't give it. Yeah, don't give away any secrets.
That's right. Make sure you're off. Well, we're going to take our break right here, and we'll be right back in just a few moments, just to sort of reflect upon what we've thought, what we've learned, and then explore more thoughts when we return here, taking your calls, questions, comments. Don't go away.
see reality haunt. If I saw another day, only to scream into the night. Nothing ever tries to change, even if I want to realize. 'Cause I've been sitting here, same old ways, taking off without the same mistake. Another way of going won't be as simple for you. I don't know how to breathe, the current that pushed. Maybe once, maybe turned around to save the time. Now I know how to. If I saw another scream into the night, nothing ever tries to change, realize. 'Cause I've been sitting here, same old ways, take it behind, follow all the leading signs. When the dark is growing and the light is closing and we're going.
Welcome back, everyone, to the third and final part of Vestiges After Dark. We just spent the last 2 hours with Dr. Grosso talking about aliens and UFOs and the implications, the social and spiritual implications of this phenomenon. When we come back here, we'll be taking more of your questions, ones we didn't get to. I think there were some for me, and continuing the discussion with Father Chris and Sister Mary Joan. Don't go away. Well, welcome back, everyone, again. And remember, the number to call if you would like to call into the show and talk to us and ask us your question directly. I would prefer it that way than coming in through the chat room. That number is 347-514-7150. That's 347-514-7150. Enter PIN number 376-8923. That's 376-8923. You can also call us international free, Skype to Skype. Just dial up Eye of the Seer, eyeoftheseer, Eye of the Seer, and we'll bring you on the air. Well, Dr. Grosso is always such a fascinating individual. I love talking to academics in philosophy. It just always is such a pleasure to hear the perspectives and the open-mindedness to new ideas and reflection. So it's always a pleasure to hear his thoughts on such things. And he's one of those that is not afraid to touch subjects that many academics consider taboo, UFOs being one of them for sure. Religion's a little bit of an easier topic to digest for most, but UFO, when you start talking aliens, peers don't necessarily respect that in academia, so I respect him for being willing to.
I don't think he gives a damn.
He doesn't. He doesn't.
Information out there. Yeah.
I don't think he does. Okay. Well, I know that you said that there were questions that were specifically for me, and I didn't want to take up his time, so we've got this segment for that. So, what were those questions, sister?
I think we actually may have answered them.
Oh, did we? Oh my!
I've got one here that Danielle just put in.
Okay.
Okay.
You did ask. So, part one: during very high vibrational meditation, I've experienced on a few occasions 3 monks stood together watching me. Where there should be faces, there's only spinning galaxies and nebula. What am I seeing?
Yeah, I did see that. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean
to be able to see that. Yeah.
When you start to reach a point now, I mean, I'm well practiced in meditation. I spent most of my college years doing just that. I would be well known for staying in meditation for hours. I'd have to set alarms, and sometimes those alarms didn't even take me out of it. I would need people to come in and actually bring me out of these meditations because I would go deep. And the better you get at it, the more profound the realizations that occur, and they can be quite startling and somewhat cosmic in scope. And I had several that I experienced in those years that were of a cosmic variety. Some that were definitely those that would shake up your paradigm, and this sounds like something on that level. Now, the three figures or monks, that is, I think, representative of that archetypal trinity, which is not just Christian, by the way. Dr. Grosso was talking a lot about Hinduism. Hinduism has a very similar trinity, which I find very interesting. And what I find fascinating about Hinduism is not only can Hinduism as a belief system be traced back about 10,000 years, and some anthropologists feel that Hinduism has about a 10,000-year-old history. There are rites in Hinduism that include words from a language that no one even remembers how to speak. They remembered the words of the prayers, but they don't remember the language itself because it happened so long ago. Fascinating stuff. But one of the things that I find very important about Hinduism being such an ancient religion and being so ahead of its time, when you consider that for most of these thousands of years, it was just shamanic, tribal type religion, which is valuable and useful and beautiful in its own way, but nowhere near the level of sophistication of Hinduism. But when you get into Hinduism, you realize that it sort of bridges the gap between monotheism and polytheism perfectly. And it shows that there really isn't a philosophical divide there like we think there is in the West. Specifically that here you have a religion that has hundreds of thousands of deities. Jesus is one that they recognize, in fact, in their pantheon. It's a very inclusive type of pantheon. And, but it all is traced back to three primary gods, which is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. So you have Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. Okay, which represents the three primary forces of the universe. And those three are manifestations of the one Brahman, which is the one God. I mean, there's no other way to define it. It's a transcendent, absolute, the God beyond all of this. That all, how they see it is that all these deities that seem so individualistic are emanations out of the power of this immense God that is so beyond understanding. And so he relates to us through these other deities that are a little bit more on the human level, dealing with, various types of human experiences which they represent. Some kind of same thing with, the Roman and Greek gods. They represented
it's like Apollo.
Yes, exactly. It's just like that. And then we are a microcosmic expression of Brahman, and that's called Atman, which is very much along the lines theologically as being made in God's image. In fact, I'd say it's exactly the same thing. It's just their way of telling that part of the story. So when I talk about perennial truth, this is what I'm really referring to, and I'm certainly not saying that this is a superior belief system to Christianity. If it were, I would be a Hindu instead of a Christian. I chose Christianity not because I grew up this way, because I didn't. And even though I might have had influences from the Christian path, they actually drove me away more than they brought me to it, as I talked about at the beginning of this show, because all I dealt with was mostly fundamentalist and lunatic kind of Christianity, where everybody's going to hell except except the person who's telling you that you're going to hell because he's doing apparently God's will. It was very it just left a bad taste in my mouth, and I wanted nothing to do with the religion. So I can't say that was anything to do with why I'm a Christian today. I'm a Christian today because I explored each and every one of these systems and found that Christianity has the most direct, most complete way of having a relationship with God. There is no other religion that does that. They all do great things, and they all have their own little niche, and some parts of these other religions do different parts of this better. But the relationship part, which I have always felt was the most important part, because of two things, and you hear me talk about this all the time. One is love, and the other is freedom. The other religions don't emphasize that to the same degree and emphasize that relationship that makes love and freedom possible. Christianity is the only one that really connects us to that in personal encounter with God, whereas the other religions tend to make it more transcendent, beyond comprehension. Not that we don't have equivalencies here too, but God comes to our level in this one. That's not the way it is in the others. It's always through some other experience. I mean, you have Vishnu incarnating in forms of you have Krishna and that type of thing, which is kind of a Jesus figure for them in a way. But still.
And yet uniquely with because I think this is what you're getting at, Brian, is that the unique understanding of Christ for Christians is that it's not like Apollo or like Vishnu. It's that God inhabits human suffering.
Yes.
Not he doesn't just put on a meat puppet,
right, and pretend to be human for
meat sack.
Yes,
yeah.
It's not like that. He takes it on, and he takes on the limitations and the adversity of what it means to be human, so that he's truly one of us, not just pretending. That's where the Gnostics got it wrong, because Jesus and most of the Gnostics,
I think, were the ones that got it the most wrong. Was it Docetism?
Docetism, yes. I mean, most of the heresies, really did a number on on understanding the Christology. But the fact of the matter is, in the end, Orthodox theology does give us, I think, the most complete picture of how much God loves us. And there's no other religion that can really do that. That's why I'm a Christian. I freely choose it for that reason. Not saying that you can't, that the other paths don't do. I mean, let me tell you, as far as my years as a Buddhist, I had some of the most profound spiritual experiences that I probably ever had in my life. I had a lot of profound ones as a Christian too, but my Buddhist ones were even greater than that.
Well, it's why spiritual experiences alone they're not a building block on which you can build a life.
No, they're not.
So they're kind of, I mean, we would say as Christians, spiritual, and you know, as Michael alluded to, I mean, there's profound, extraordinary spiritual experiences within Christianity, you know, within the monasteries, within the, you know, the revelation, the saints that we celebrate, all the rest of it.
Yes.
But you know, nobody. I mean, unlike Michael, I am creedal, and none of us in the church ever stand up on Sunday and in place of the Nicene Creed say, "And I believe in Saint Teresa of Avila's, you know, levitation." It's not something we place our faith in. It's
Right.
not a reason for our faith.
Yeah, they're not articles
But
of the faith.
That's not to deny the spiritual fruits of that faith, of which that was one. You know, and so I think, and this is why, you know, experience is always something to be not to, I don't fear experience. I'm not a Puritan, you know,
Right.
but it's experience alone isn't enough. I mean, and this is my kind of, I'm not a nanny when it comes to things like psilocybin or, you know, marijuana, wherever it may be. But my kind of, I guess I have an instinctive suspicion of that way. And it's not because I'm the wowzer. It's because I think, well, you can actually, you know, you actually can stimulate your brain to think things. You know, if you take LSD, it'll have a certain effect on you.
Oh, yes.
And that's physiological. And yes, it interacts with your mind because, you know, again, another thing that I was going to say was contingent is yes. And I said it in the chat box as, you know, although the mind is distinct from the brain, it's contingent on the brain.
Well,
tethered together.
it's clearly there because, I mean, you clearly can see that a person with traumatic brain injury, for example, does not function the same way prior to the injury. Behavior's affected, emotions affected.
Right.
Yes. And so there's clearly a connection. Now, I mean, it might be, to get a little metaphysical and, dare I say, new agey, it might be plausible to suggest or posit that the brain is essentially a massive antenna that picks up the signal of our truer nature or the actual mind that we're connected to, that part of us that does transcend the body, and that the brain is merely the antenna for that. So when the antenna gets damaged, the signal doesn't come through clearly or correctly, and it's got more of a staticky effect, which was kind of what we see in TBI patients and that type of thing. I mean, I think that's a plausible metaphysical theory. Whether or not it's true, you know, that's debatable. But I do think, though, that yes, I think as far as our purposes as human beings, we need a brain. Do we need it as a spiritual creature? Probably not, but there does seem to be, at least in Judeo-Christian theology, an emphasis on the merging of the incorporeal with the corporeal. It seems to be important to God's creative process. There seems to be a reason he designed it that way. And furthermore, that heaven isn't described as some kind of spiritual ethereal dimension, but rather an actual physical place that we will inhabit, and the actual bodies of the dead rising from the graves to inhabit this new heaven and earth.
Which is also one of the arguments against the Puritans.
Yes.
You know, because at its most extreme, Puritanism is essentially Gnostic. You know, it's about...
The Gnostics have influenced conventional Christianity far more than the church would ever like to. And I mean by the church, I mean the entire church. I'm talking Protestant and Catholic and Orthodox, evangelical. I mean, everyone talks badly about the Gnostics, but Gnosticism had a massive impact on what we believe as Christians today. Yeah.
And to go back to what you were saying about, you know, the idea that similar themes are responded to in different cultures and different religions. Of course, that's true. And for those of us that believe in one God, it wouldn't surprise us because we've been created in his image and we're all, you know, inspired by that or conditioned by that, however you want to look at it. But I do think it also highlights the distinctiveness and the reason that we shouldn't be too universalistic about it. And again, we have this balance to be struck. So yes, it's true that within Hinduism, you could be devoted to Jesus Christ as a revelation of God. I actually knew more about Hinduism than Christianity as a teenager because I didn't grow up in the church either. And when I was at school, I studied Hinduism because I thought it'd be interesting.
Well, you went the Hindu route, I went the Buddhist route, and both ended up as as Catholic clergy. Go figure.
Yeah, that's right. And so when I was at seminary, we had an Irishman he was, but a Hindu priest, and his God was Jesus. But I think just as we might say of ourselves, what we can see, other things reflected in our tradition, but we're honest enough to say, but it's not the same. Really, we have to say the same thing about Hinduism, co-opting Christian images, because clearly Hinduism does not believe of Jesus what Jesus claimed of himself. Because if Hinduism did, they'd be Christian.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yes, you can be devoted to Jesus, but it's not the same thing as being a Christian.
No. And that's something that I think even exists within the convention of Christianity itself, because I think there's a lot of people who think they're themselves Christians, and yet they're not. I like to tell people that if you can recite the Nicene Creed and find something wrong with it, something that you're like, I like everything, but I don't like that. I would argue, you might disagree, Father, but I would argue that's enough to make you no longer a Christian. Because I don't
disagree at all.
Okay, I didn't think you. I didn't know because some people get upset when I say that. But the fact of the matter is, the tenets of the faith are intrinsic to understanding the personhood of Jesus and having that relationship. So yes, God.
Those people are most akin to saying, "Oh, I like the teaching." I mean, Gandhi said this. I like the teaching of Jesus. I like this Jesus person. I don't think much of his followers, they don't seem to do what he says. Now, that's kind of amusing rhetoric, and we get it. Of course, Gandhi was not speaking as some, innocent Indian that didn't know anything about Christianity. He went to Trinity College, Dublin. He was a clever guy. He was a lawyer, and he was steeped in the West. Yeah. So, there's a false naivety sometimes attributed to Gandhi. He was far smarter than people realize. But there's lots of people that will say, "Oh, they love the teachings of Jesus. Let's live our lives by that." That does not make you a Christian if you don't also believe on the third day he rose again. And that's the crux. For me, that's the crux. Because if there's one thing that people will not believe about the creed, it's that.
Yeah.
The rest of it they can kind of go with. But you see, if you, or to put it another way, to look at it in the reverse, if you do believe that Jesus rose on the third day, you will believe all the other things in the creed.
That is a good assessment. But getting back to the question, I would just simply say that those are archetypal expressions that spawn out of our consciousness and our connection to these higher realities that that slowly reveal themselves in meditation. So as we meditate and go deeper into cosmic awareness is really what we're achieving in high-level meditation. The archetypes are going to become more naked and apparent and not be more obscured in the way that they are through normal consciousness, where it's mostly subconscious influence that the archetypes have. They're more apparent in these deeper transcendental states of meditation. So therefore, the three I think is a divine representation, and the galaxies I think is cosmic understanding of creation. All of these are themes that would be apparent in a meditative state. So that's what I think those things mean. You said that was a part one of two. Father, was that?
Yeah. So
you just answered part two.
Oh, I did.
You answered part two. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
We do have another one from Valek 666. It's to me. Sorry. Do you think those who are claircognizant, I'm too English, I have to say cognizant, I'm afraid, are actually getting direct guidance from the spiritual world? I think the answer to that is they can be. and certainly within our tradition, and more so in the medieval and before church, but also in the contemporary Eastern church, this is very much practiced. So yes, I do believe that, but I don't think it's always true.
I think a lot of it comes down to discernment.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd be aware of, and I say this a lot to Pentecostal Christians, and I don't have universally bad things to say about Pentecostal Christians like a lot of people do. But what I do say to them is, with this emphasis on speaking in tongues, for example, which is a spiritual emanation of sorts, that, the demons can speak in tongues as well as the angelic. And right. So number one, yes, it's possible. Number two, it's not always the case, no matter how well-meaning somebody might be. And number three, it can also be from a not good place.
And I think that's where discernment becomes paramount. And I say this,
spiritual maturity.
Of all of the gifts of the Spirit, discernment is the one that I think is the least cultivated. And it's the one that's perhaps the most important outside of love. And the reason I say that is because, there are fantastic things that can occur that are well outside of the Christian paradigm, and the things that the Bible doesn't talk about, explicitly or clearly, that are of a spiritual nature and can pose risk if one does not know how to discern it correctly. So, I think the answer to that, to elaborate on everything that Father Chris said, which I fully agree with, I would just simply say that the deciding factor there is the person's internal discernment, which you might, as an outsider, might not know. So should you trust somebody who tells you that they're picking up some kind of awareness about something? I think you have to discern that too. So if your discernment's not that good, and then you're not going to know whether or not their discernment's any good, and that's what gets you into trouble. But yes, as Father Chris said, of course it's possible. It's absolutely possible. And remember, things like talking to the dead, for example, that you talk to an evangelical Christian, and they're almost going to universally consider that to be demonic, evil. You're going to hell for it sometimes. I mean, there's all sorts of things that they will say. So obviously mediums like Michael and Marty Perry, who we had on a few weeks ago, which you, Father Chris, had a profound, I think, experience with them that day. But unexpectedly, we weren't thinking that they were going to pick up anything,
right,
about you. We were, they were trying to tune into the audience, and yet you were coming through loud and clear. But that sometimes happens. But, an evangelical Christian might watch that episode and say, "Oh, they're all demons. They're all evil. They're all seduced by Satan," or whatever. Like the guy that I commented about at the beginning of the show with questions from the ether. That's the kind of thing that is based upon this somewhat. Well, not somewhat, I would say a profound ignorance of theological understanding, because they're taking it for face value. They're not understanding the context. They don't read it in the original language, and they're really not understanding how it all fits together. But when you really read scripture, the condemnation is necromancy, almost universally. Even when you get back into the Hebrew, you see that they had an understanding that in order to talk to the dead, you had to conjure the dead. You had to literally bring them here. You had to do a ritual that would actually...
Yeah, with entrails and all of that.
Exactly. That is what is being condemned. The Bible doesn't really talk about the kind of mediumship that someone like Marty and Michael Perry would practice, or something that has that natural innate instinct.
This is also a problem of categories. Because...
Yes, very true.
Because... the reason it is rightly condemned in the scriptures is because, is to proclaim that trying to please God or bring about salvation through such means is a total folly. And I still believe that today. Yeah. You're not saved by some medium telling you something about your dead relative. That's not going to save you. It might be something you're interested in. It might be something that's being told to you for a good or bad reason. But in other words, if it becomes the source of our hope and religion, then then we are truly lost.
And that is the danger of it. That is, because that's what happens, is it becomes a religion of its own. I think that's exactly how the New Age movement became as prolific as it is, because these metaphysical concepts that exist sort of in all religions in various degrees, all of a sudden became the belief system on its own. And that's, voila, now we have the New Age. Sister Mary Joan can tell you.
Even worse than that. I mean, that was bad enough, but it's actually quite sweet compared to what's happened now, which is we have religion with no spirituality.
Oh my God!
We have religion that's politics. We have
religion that's science.
So it's gone completely political.
Yeah. And so, and I think actually I mean, I'm no prophet, but I suspect we're reaching the limits of that because, well, it's boring.
It doesn't fulfill, I think, ultimately, and I think now people are particularly starting to see the folly in it. Because, here in the U.S., I think everyone was so fed up. Well, not everyone. There were people that loved him, but a large part of this country was fed up with the Trump administration. Even people that voted for him, I knew, were fed up with him by the time, they were tired of the tweets. They were tired of the unprofessionalism. And I don't think anyone can really argue that the man did not have a presidential demeanor. Some people applaud that, saying that, well, finally somebody that's genuine. I don't know if you call that genuine. I just know that a lot of people in the country were fed up and just wanted whatever normalcy they saw as possible, and they grasp onto Biden, who's sort of this, basic run-of-the-mill politician, what we've had for decades now.
Oh, the most cynical type of politician.
Really. Yeah.
And I agree with you about Trump. I mean, I think I do agree with Ben Shapiro's analysis, which is to say that Trump was the coroner, not the murderer.
Well, there's something to be said for that. And I think so. But, now that we have Biden, a lot of people that voted for him are just as dissatisfied. So they're realizing the religion of politics isn't really a very fulfilling religion once you start playing it.
And you'll only be disappointed. It doesn't matter who you vote for.
That's all you can. Yeah, exactly. But
Marina said something interesting in the chat, because I think you mentioned discernment before, and I think it is really important.
Yeah.
What we haven't done is help people perhaps to know where they can find that sort of discernment. I mean, some of this spiritual stuff, I sort of compare it to getting an email from a Nigerian widow promising you, $20 million if you do X, Y, Z. Most of us can discern that that's probably not true.
We hope
probably
so.
Not good.
I don't know. Chain letters really get circulated around there, Father, so I don't know.
Yeah. So, but in terms of this, like Marina reminded me that in the Orthodox Church, if they have a weeping icon, the first process they do is to exorcise the icon. In other words, let's make sure this is not demonic.
Yeah, it's wise.
Because to quote, it's all in Macbeth. I quote Macbeth all the time. Oftentimes, the winners with their harms, the instruments of darkness tell us truths. Yeah. So the best way for the devil to get us is to get us thinking we're worshiping God. But in terms of discernment of spiritual matters, there are some like really basic things to do, which is to say, well, does this conflict with the scriptures? So, a spirit tells me I should go and murder somebody. Well, the entire Judeo-Christian revelation tells you that cannot be from God because it's prescribed. Mm-hmm. It's that's very straightforward. Yeah, that kind of discernment is 101. But in terms of discerning other things, the scriptures. But most importantly, and the Orthodox would say this as the answer to any question, speak to your priest. And if you haven't got a priest, don't even try to discern these things, because that's the first problem. Yeah. Make sure you've got a priest, which means you've got to be engaged in that practice. And then ask your priest. Also, it's true to say, and Bishop Brian says this all the time, not all priests are blessed with the same gifts, nor should they be.
You're being more kind than I would have been.
I'm kindness personified, which I can get away with anybody that doesn't actually know me very well. But another way is there are monasteries on this earth. The monastic life monasteries are very good places for discernment.
Yeah,
Not
go on
only of
retreats.
spiritual things, but, yeah, if you're, and that's why we go on retreats as well. So any of those things would be very good starting points. And have you noticed how I've not mentioned the internet once?
Yeah, YouTube is not the place to learn. I mean, I know our show's on YouTube as its primary channel, but, in reality, YouTube is typically not the place to learn discernment or things that you can trust because, let's face it, anybody with a computer can put something up there, and if you have a little bit of editing skill, you can make something look pretty convincing. Doesn't make it true. So the discernment has to be there.
I think also just to address the point that, yes, we're on YouTube. We're not actually here saying we've got all the answers to life.
No, we're not.
I've always seen my role as being a signpost. The role of any Christian is to be a signpost.
Right.
In other words, to say, I'm not the source of all of these answers, but I know where the source is. It's that way. It's this way. Well, it's Christ, and so I think that's a very different claim to somebody saying, tell me your experiences and I'll interpret them absolutely for you. I don't think no spiritual father or mother worth their salt would ever make such a claim.
No.
Have the answers you seek with my 4-disc set for $79.99 for payments of. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we see that you don't even have to go into the New Age to find that. I mean, I would argue that Joel Osteen is a Christian example of that. See, he sells dreams. Well, technically, yeah, by our definition, absolutely not. But I'm sure he thinks he is. And, but I agree. I mean, I don't think he doesn't, I don't think, hold to the creed. My standard is the creed. I would say that there's a lot of room in Christianity for speculation and sort of, weighing different things that are not necessarily, I think you said it best, and Sister Mary Joan can validate this. I say this all the time, on and off the air, probably more so off the air. The Bible was not written to be a metaphysical book that explains to you the mysteries of the universe. The Bible was written to be a manual for salvation. So it focuses in on that. That's its primary purpose. That's its primary function. And that's what the content is about. It's not going to talk about things like, I hear people say, oh, the aliens can't be true because it's not in the Bible. Well, why would it be? What do aliens have to do with salvation? That would just be a distraction at best to talk about that. So even if they did know something about this, they probably would not have included it because that's not relevant to the process of salvation. So getting back to this, what is Joel Osteen really teaching? Is he teaching the path to salvation, or is he teaching, basically that greed is good? He's basically like a religious Gordon Gekko. I mean, you ever see Wall Street, Father? Did you ever remember the movie Wall Street with Michael Douglas? Gordon Gekko has that famous speech, greed is good. I kind of see that prosperity gospel is just like sort of sugarcoating greed. And that's not Christianity.
No, I mean, I think, my main criticism of that kind of Christianity is, how do they deal with suffering and sacrifice?
Ignore it.
If we're only blessed, if we only, it's essentially a kind of transactional religion. I believe in God. If I believe in him enough, he'll make me wealthy. And then I can thank God for that.
Yeah.
Well, what does that say about street children in the city of God in Rio de Janeiro? Yeah. What does that say about people in Calcutta?
They don't have enough faith. They just don't have enough faith.
Whereas we know authentic faith, genuine Christian faith, has Mother of Teresa in Calcutta.
Yeah.
Has the Brazilian Catholic Church going onto the streets in the city of God offering mass.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, it's so easy to say what a load of bullshit, basically.
Yeah, those folks get their wealth from the backs of people who are desperate to have answers.
They're only convincing people who are the worried well anyway.
They think they can buy their way into into the kingdom.
Yeah,
I mean, I think they think it's like
class.
that.
It's just naff.
Nah.
I don't get it. It just irritates me because, obviously it's very successful. Here's the Nicolaitan Church, struggling to make a position in this world where it's in a position to help a lot of people, and it just simply can't because it does not have the scope of resource that someone like Joel Osteen currently has, and he's doing it by selling lies and feel good, as you said, bullshit. It is bullshit.
People want to be comfortable.
Yes.
They don't want to know that it's supposed to be hard.
They don't want to be challenged at all. You're right.
You got to work for it, and you will be challenged.
Right.
There's no getting around it.
Depends how you measure success, doesn't it?
Well, that's true.
I mean, don't get me wrong. It would be wonderful to have that kind of ability to invest in an outreach.
Well, I just see it as useful. I mean, it's like I'm not even sure I would want it for myself because I think it would be more work than I'd probably have the energy for. But I see it in terms of if this church had it instead of that one, assuming you can even call what he has a church. And like, I agree with you. I don't think that's Christianity. But it is, legally a church here, and there are millions of dollars coming into it from millions of people giving those dollars because they're getting something out of it that is completely useless.
But if we look at the real church, the Catholic and Orthodox Church, East and West, I'm not making a distinction.
Yeah.
Both lungs. If you look at, if you want to measure success in numerical terms, there's far more of the faithful in the Catholic and Orthodox churches than there is in Joel Osteen's church. And there always will be, because, again, this is the dilemma: is that we're in the end times. We're not in heaven now,
right?
And so, although heaven's breaking in all around us, and our job is to look for it and celebrate that, the prince of this world is the devil.
They forget that. I always tell people, how was the devil able to promise Jesus all of the kingdoms of the world if they weren't already his to start with? What does that tell you about politics? What does that tell you about the rulers of this world and who they're in cahoots with and who really influences them? If you ever
what
wonder,
does it tell you about the wealth of this world compared to a grain of sand in heaven?
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't buy it. I think that if we find ourselves, wanting to be, look, we all want to have, a comfortable life. We want to provide for our children. None of those things are bad and wicked. But actually, if we think we'll be fulfilled by material things, we're in for a shock.
It's going to be.
If we ever get them.
And I think a lot of people are in for a shock.
Well, a lot of lottery winners don't do very well.
No. There's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. And I think it's because that it's false. It creates illusions when you're already saturated in illusions, and we're all neck deep in illusions as it is. When you create an instant picture of the archetype of success, which people don't measure it by their salvation. People don't measure success by their relationship to God. They measure it by how much money they bring in, how big their house is, how big their car is, how great their job is, how powerful they are in the world. They don't measure it by the things that matter. They measure it by these empty things, which are all the empty promises of the devil, really.
I'm no anti-capitalist. I'm 100% lazy. Okay?
You're kind of breaking up there, Father. I don't know what it is.
Oh.
Yeah, there's your mic's.
The mic.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep. Now it's good.
I just wanted to make the important point that I'm not some anti-capitalist. I'm a laissez-faire capitalism guy. I don't like crony capitalism. I hate socialism. So I'm not opposed to wealth and the things of this world.
Well, what does the Bible say? Everyone misquotes it. They say that money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. They misquote it. And I think that's what you're getting at.
You can't serve both God and mammon.
Yeah.
Isn't to say that you can't have money.
Yeah.
It's to say you shouldn't serve money.
Right.
And that money should. So I've got no. I like Elon Musk as it happens at the moment. I kind of like the way where he's coming from. I love the fact that he's very wealthy and that he has freedom ideas and all the rest of it.
He's definitely very
religion is.
Turning very libertarian, isn't he?
Yeah. I love that about him. So none of that means he's in any danger at all. But on the day of judgment, we know how we will be judged. I was naked and you clothed me. I was hungry and you fed me. I was in prison and you visited me. So, if money helps you to do those things, that's a great thing. That's truly the blessing of money for somebody who is serving God.
And don't you wish Joel Osteen and people that preach the prosperity gospel would actually understand that?
Yeah. But if money takes you away from those things, then it's not serving you. Money's neither evil nor good. No. It's our relationship with money that makes it evil or good, because only humans are capable of that.
Yeah,
and so it's always about intention. But it turns out that wealth brings problems that are unique to wealth.
Yeah, and that's why I don't understand Osteen's approach, and I don't get it. I don't get it. I get it because it's a great business model. And I think that's exactly what it is. I think it's a manipulation.
It might even be more to him than that. I'm sure he thinks he's doing good. Yeah, I don't
he probably
think
does.
Any point questioning his motives. Yeah. I think that
I don't know the man, so I don't know. Yeah.
No, who knows? That's right. But I don't hear his confession, so I've no idea.
I'm sure he doesn't need one in his mind.
I don't think he knows. Yeah, I don't think he gets that whole confession.
No, I don't think
you
so.
Judge a tree by its fruits, and so I don't know. But there is one person who does know, and that's God, and that's who he. But ultimately, it's in the scriptures. We came into the world with nothing. We'll leave the world with nothing. Mm-hmm. You can't take it. I went to a funeral of a dear man on Saturday. Russian Orthodox deacon, and he died very young, and he died of COVID. He was actually my eye surgeon. He laser corrected my eyes.
Oh, really?
Wow.
So a great man, and you know what Russian Orthodox funerals are like. It was huge.
Oh yeah,
and it was beautiful, and it was devastatingly moving.
Yeah.
But actually, I came away from that filled with hope, because you think something that was said at his funeral by the bishop was. He made you confident in being a Christian in his manner.
Yeah.
And it was so true. It was wonderful because it was so true of this man in particular. And I think, so there's a man who actually was very successful in the eyes of the world, was a doctor, and all of that. But what made him super successful was serving Christ. And that's what he takes with him out of this world.
Have to stay humble in success.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it will eat you up, and you will fall into that trap that everybody else does when they come into money.
It's ego.
Don't forget where you come from.
It's ego, I think. Ultimately, it comes
where you're
back to
headed
that.
for.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you know what? On that note, it's the end of the show. But Father Chris, Sister Mary Joan, thank you as always. We will be
very much.
Absolutely. We'll be here next week with a new guest, Margaret Mary O'Connor. She is here to talk about the female Catholic priesthood. I think Father Chris is going to have some fun with that one. And I know we will too. It's going to be a interesting time. She has some interesting historical precedents to share with us. I'm looking forward to it, honestly. You all know my feelings on the female Catholic priesthood. If I could have female priests, I would, because let me tell you, I've got more women interested in what I do. Almost no men. Father Chris, you're like the only one. But anyway, we'll be here next week, Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. See you then. And until that time, I'll see you out there in the ether. God bless.